All right, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And lovely to see Matthew here, which has just boosted my nerves immensely. So I was pretty nervous about today. I'm a little bit more nervous now. Hopefully, we'll be fine. So you can see I have a very engaging intro slide here. So yeah, I'm Daniel. I am a data platform MVP based in New Zealand. I think there's a little bit of contact info here about me. I guess the key things about me is I work part-time with a company in Australia called DiscoverEI, who are run by another MVP, Alice Drummond, who I think's done the pub quiz with you folks before, and Christian as well. And the rest of the time I do mostly freelance data viz work, or I'm writing code for the Power BI community. So in terms of what I've done, again, very high tech. Hopefully this will come across. No, it's not coming across. That's annoying. Everything's broken. Why is that not working? There we go. Power BI just decided to lock up. Here's a very high-tech segue to some of the things that you may have seen that I've done. So I write and publish open source and free visuals to AppSource. That's the visual store inside Power BI. So you may have come across the small multiple line chart. That was one of mine. Followed up with the violin plot, which I think has turned up in a few reports here and there. HTML content, which is kind of is what it says. You can add it to a report and put HTML in there. And the one we're here to talk about today is Deneb. So these are the four that I publish and look after. So what we're going to do today, we'll talk a little bit about visualization options in Power BI and some of the rationale about what has sort of come to pass to get us where we are. A little bit about some of the thought process we have to think about. We'll do some very simple demos because we can, we've got basically blank canvas, so we don't, we can go crazy, but we'll keep it fairly structured. Talk a little bit about further resources and Q&A. And I think as Greg was saying, if you've got questions, I'm quite happy to take them as they come along. If you want to chime in, that's not a problem. Sometimes they kind of reveal themselves as we go through, and so I may defer them, but very happy to be disturbed if you need to. So I think we'll crack on. So yeah, I think the key thing I like to think about, and I have a background in most of the BI. I'm actually conventionally sort of Kimball trained and a modeler and an architect. But as I started to use Power BI more, I got more involved in the gamut of BI a little bit more than I was conventionally. And I think the key thing I've learned with my projects is when you're building a data model and doing ETL and various other things, that can take up quite a large part of the project. So it's quite a big piece of work to get that data clean, get it repeatably loadable, and that's not always easy to communicate to people. So I often had I was often talking with my stakeholders directly, despite doing a lot of development work, and it was always hard to communicate progress because people weren't interested in how the model was going or how the ETL was going or what issues we'd encountered. They just wanted to see some stuff. So what I often found was, even though we've got that image, I think we've seen floating around where you've got 10% of BI's the visuals and the other stuff is the iceberg. You've got the iceberg under the water. It's quite a big piece of work, but the visual layer is really your stakeholders' view of your effort. So it's kind of crucial to get it right.
I don't know if you have any questions or if you just
Oh, sorry. Let's see if we can get them muted. Sorry. There we go.
I got it. Sorry about that.
No, that's cool. Always like to check just to make sure. So yeah, and think we've got a pretty good visual layer in Power BI. But what we have is, we've got pretty decent control over the data model. We can write measures that are very, very complicated. We've now got things like calculation groups and some tools that really help us to really get in there and do some creative things with measures. With the ETL side of things, particularly in Power BI, you've got your get and transform or your Power Query, and that's basically visual, but you do have the ability that if you want to step off the well-trodden path and actually do a bit of a Power user type stuff, you can actually delve in and edit that in the M language. So you've got the ability to kind of dive a little deeper there. But with visuals, it's a little bit more tricky. We don't really have a kind of language that's similar. We sort of do, which kind of leads us to this little page here. So this is something I like to throw up every now and again, and this is a very simple view. There's a lot more out there than what I'm going to show you, but in terms of how you may approach visualization in Power BI, you generally start with your core visuals, and we have this little visual here, which is, in terms of ease of getting into things, you can start on the left here, the clicky draggy droppy stuff. So you can come over here and choose a visual and drag it onto the canvas and start putting things in. And if core visuals don't fulfill that, there's the ability to go to get more visuals and have a look in the store and see if someone's done that for you. So these are our kind of common scenario type things over here. Now, when we say we don't have a visual language, we do, but it's kind of all the way over here. We've got R and Python, and these are visuals that are offered inside Power BI. But we also have the ability to develop custom visuals using the SDK. So that's something that Microsoft make available. And the challenge with that is it's often quite tricky to approach if you need to do it on demand. So this is a very quick overview here of the documentation. So Microsoft have documentation on how to develop visuals. But what you have to sort of think about is not just what you're doing for the user, but also how Power BI works under the hood. So this is a very, it's a simple diagram for what's going on, but this shows all the events and things you have to think about when you build a visual. And it's not just the graphical stuff, it's the interactivity and the filtering and various other things. So when you start to think, oh, I'll build a custom visual, not only do you have to, excuse me, not only do you have to change your domain almost to web development, that's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So there's not many of us that do span those disciplines. Some do, and I had some experience before I got into Power BI, which helped me out a bit. But if you need something quickly, it's quite difficult to bridge that gap and have the time available to do that. So often people fall back to the R and Python side of things, and a lot of people in the data science domain are able to leverage existing libraries. Like with R, you've got ggplot. With Python, you've got Seaborn or Plotly. There's numerous packages you can use, and they don't need the whole features of the language, so you can get into that quite quickly. So the downside with the R and Python stuff is there's a lot of knowledge out there. But if you want interactivity or tooltips or things like that, it's often quite difficult to make a visual look and feel like it's at home. And so there's also things like you need to have R or Python running on your machine if you're authoring the report. And then if you publish to the Power BI service, you maybe need to think about things like gateways or execution time and how much resources something needs, and the fact that a visual comes back as a static image. And there's what we call a little bit of a cold start there, where Power BI needs to delegate that work off to R or Python to do the thing you want. So good news, recently we had something come in on the right side of the low coding line, which you've had Mike Collar recently at your user group talking about Charticulator. So Charticulator is a Microsoft-built custom visual, and it allows you to build visuals from the ground up using an interface. So this is thinking a little differently to clicking, dragging, and dropping, but it still gives you the comfort of a user interface that you can work with. There's a big gap in the middle, and what we're here to talk about today is Deneb. So the way we see Deneb, and I'll explain the rationale in just a moment before we get to demoing, is there are people that want to do more, but don't necessarily have the time or inclination to cross-skill into web development. So the idea is, how can we bridge the gap between Power BI native visuals, or visuals that have a lot of what makes Power BI, and giving people a language that we can use to customize a lot about the visual layer. So this is where we're sort of coming from. For what it's worth, this visual is a Power BI visual. It's built in Deneb. So you are able to do some pretty interesting storytelling type things. So just to prove, I can drag that around and it'll resize and respond. So we've actually got some pretty cool stuff that, I try to use visuals where I can, and I try to use Power BI to present rather than PowerPoint. So hence why I'm not using PowerPoint today. So if we just wind back a second, we have Power BI, which lets us pick and choose our visuals or install other visuals. And what's really nice is if we have dedicated visuals and we have a UI to build them, and drag them and make them simple to access, that's great because it's less effort and it's optimal workflow. So that's less clicks, less time to sort of spend in the weeds. And if you want quick insights, that's pretty handy. And it's quite good for common use cases as well. So, a lot of common charts, bar charts, line charts, those kind of things, they serve a lot of common use cases and are very accessible for people. So the challenge we have is that with these kind of things, tools like Power BI, Excel, and so on, they will expose the type of chart that you need as a thing you can choose. So you can see here, we've got a stacked bar chart, a stacked column chart, and a clustered bar chart. So we've basically got across the top here 6 types of chart that are fundamentally using the same kind of shape, but each one is its own unit. So we choose the chart we want for the scenario we want, and we've got some properties in there that we can customize. But what about if we want to look around our data and explore and think about how we might be able to visualize it in different ways? How can we prototype an idea? How can we iterate and evolve that idea without kind of swapping around or searching too much? What happens if we want to layer certain types on? So for instance, we have some combo chart support where we can have, say, a line and stack column chart or something like that. But if we want to add reference lines or other types of information, our choices start to become a little bit more limited. And what if we want to control lower level cosmetic things? So with we have properties that are exposed through Power BI's properties pane. So, I can click on this text box here and I've got certain things I can change, but these are things that are exposed by the people developing the visual. So this is a text box and Microsoft have made certain properties available. With a custom visual, you choose from app source. I, as a developer, decide what those properties are. So if I design a visual that works how I think it should work, that's great, but you're dependent on me to deliver that. And it's the same kind of thing with the core visuals. You wait for updates to Power BI Desktop to get new features, assuming they come in. So you sort of have a few quandaries if you're that sort of minded. If you want to explore your data and prototype and iterate and come up with new potential ideas. So what we want to try and do is move out of the mindset of choosing a predefined type of chart in your head, picking a chart from a palette and just working to it and actually thinking more about it the other way around. So if we think of a tool like ggplot, which is kind of fundamental if you do work in the R language, that breaks up charts into functional elements or aesthetics or things you call. So in your language, you ask for a bar or you ask for a line, but it's done as a chain of functions and allows you to build up elements of the chart as you go. And Charticulator that we talked about, that flips the idea on its head that you kind of need to think about your data first. So you put your data into the visual and then you start to build up a visual out of the components they offer inside rather than just choosing a certain chart type. So yeah, these have the same approach. Certain things are exposed, certain cosmetic elements, and you bind those to your data. And the functionality is provided either through a language or through a user interface to scaffold those up, bind them to your data, and apply effects, visuals, things like styling or sizing based on those things. And that's often referred to as a grammar of graphics or mark-based visualization. So the grammar of graphics is a pretty big area, and it's quite hard to cover in an hour or so. But to talk to distill it into one diagram, we have what's called the grammar of graphics pipeline. And the grammar of graphics was coined and written about by Leland Wilkinson, who's sadly no longer with us. But it's a book that details how to think about building a visual up and breaking it into components so that each area has its own discrete tasks. So we start with our source, which is typically our data, and then we move it through this pipeline of different systems. And in each system, our variables, our algebra, our scales, our statistics, and so on, they all do one thing. They don't care about what the other thing does, but they do their own thing. And as we get through the pipeline, we get closer to the top in terms of aesthetics. So what we talk about when we mean aesthetics is what type of shape is it? What type of color is it? What visual encodings do we add? But before that, we kind of work out where it goes on the page and any other things we need to do to it. And the earlier we do this, and I think, it almost goes back to, I don't want to spoil the quiz too much at the end, but you can almost apply this policy to your data in Power BI when you're transforming it. We want to think like that with graphics as well, because if we do this in the wrong order, we can code our visual up in any order we like, but it becomes harder if we do the shapes before we do the scaling, for instance. So it's quite hard to talk about this in isolation, but hopefully this starts to make sense. But I do have a couple of things I can do to help articulate that. So if we think about, a bar chart in Power BI, we would normally click on it and we would bind data to it and configure it up. And it's likely, not that I can say because I don't know, but it's very likely that Microsoft have developed their bar chart component using this kind of idea in their code. And if you were to develop a custom visual, you got to think about this as well. But what we want to try and do is make that a bit easier. But first, to try and explain the middle ground, we have to understand what goes into building a visual. So if we were to start with an example, and we want to build a simple bar chart, we've got a table here with two fields. We've got our country code, just to save space, and we would call that a nominal or categorical variable. That's basically a column, and we can see that Power BI aggregates it to the column level. So we have one row per country code. We have a measure called sales, which is our quantitative measure. It's a value that we can bind to an aggregated column or dimension value. So this is something we can use to help us understand where we want to get to. We have 5 rows, and each row has a value. Now, when we want to build a visual a bit more primitively, we have to think about the container that it's in. So this is a Power BI visual container, and it's X pixels wide by Y pixels high. And with the web, which is the web layer, the HTML, the CSS, which is what the Power BI visual layer runs inside, this sort of bit here, probably some other parts of the app as well, but this is the bit that you see in the service. This is a web page. Let's just boil it down to something that's simple. The coordinate systems for laying out things, the X goes the way we expect, but the Y starts from the top to the bottom, and that's not how we usually think about Cartesian charts, which are the other way around. So what we have to think about then is how we encode or scale the logical values of our measures and dimensions to those physical coordinates. So we then have to think about, actually, we kind of flip it around. And in the case of country, actually, we probably do want to run it from top to bottom. But if we were putting the axis for sales over here instead, then we might want it to start from the bottom to the top. So we have to think about that as a way of converting our data to a physical location. So what we want to think about then, though, is it's not just about the spacing and the scaling. We actually have to think about showing that in a human readable way. And that's where axes come in. So we've converted our country code to our physical position based on its value. And we have an axis for our sales measure, which is, 0 to maximum, and because we're thinking about a bar chart, we want to start at 0. So this is the kind of thing we have to think about. And then once we've got this kind of skeleton in place, it's then a case of adding in the physical stuff. So what we have is we've got our bar chart that looks a bit more familiar, but we've got a rectangle shape which represents each data point. So we've got Canada and Germany and France and Mexico and the US. And we've got a rectangle here that represents each one of those. And its width is the value of the measure. So it's very easy for us to visually resolve that. This axis could disappear and we would still be able to know that the US is the high value. Now, normally you'd probably put the US at the top and sort in descending order, but we can still visually work that out. And it just improves the cognitive process if we do sort it, but we can work that out. But these are the kind of things we have to think about. So if we were to think about that from a coding perspective, I do apologize. My Windows 11 taskbar has gone. It tends to freeze just when I need it. If we were to look at a bar chart in a language like D3, which is it's a way of helping make JavaScript work a bit more in a friendly way. So this does a lot of what we want to do, what we just talked about. But to build a bar chart, we actually have to write a fair bit of code, and we can see this scaling and there's axes, and there's various other bits of logic in here. And we're actually adding the shapes to the web page and scaling them based on the things we work out of above. Now, this is a bit of a, this is just the start of writing a custom visual. This is before you've thought about properties and tooltips and cross-filtering and all that kind of stuff. So it's not an attractive option for some people, as we've already established. So what we want to try and do is that grammar of graphics framework, pulling that up for people is quite a nice thing, because we can possibly simplify some of the language, but still give people a bit of a, something a bit lower level. So what we want to do is think about what we just did on the previous page, which is we almost direct that to tell us, to tell Power BI what we want to draw. And once we've done that, we've then got something we can refine and iterate. So we could change the bar into a line or a dot or something that's encoded with the same data properties, but we can start changing its cosmetic things much more easily. And we could add more fields to it if we wanted to, or we could add additional marks in layers over the top. So we can start to build in things like reference lines or entirely different shapes. But these things take a lot of work. The Charticulator, for instance, which is such a tool, required a lot of R&D at Microsoft through a lot of smart people much smarter than me. So these things are quite rare, and Tableau is another example. So if some of you have used Tableau, that's another example of a grammar of graphics type user interface, and I do not know how many people they have working on that, but I imagine it's quite a lot. So somebody like me, I don't have that kind of resource. So what I want to try and do is bring something in that can bridge those gaps. Going back to this diagram here, and we're talking about Deneb, which we'll get to, we want to kind of close that gap a bit. So what we have is we have two languages, Vega and Vega-Lite. And these are really good candidates because they're written by the University of Washington Interactive Data Lab. So these are people that are really good at that area. And D3 is something that came out of there as well. But Vega and Vega-Lite are what we're going to focus on. Still supported today. So even though those folks developed it and are now in their respective places, some are still there, some have moved on to other companies, but they're still supporting the languages and they're quite mature now. But what's nice about them is they're not JavaScript or R or Python. It uses JSON, which is a data structure that us as data professionals can get our heads around more easily than perhaps code. So what happens is we write some JSON, which is a list of directives we want the language to do. And then the interpreter will pass that and it will render it. And we've got, as we say, Vega and Vega-Lite, and both have their strengths and weaknesses, but Vega-Lite is probably the easier one for people to get their head around. So just very quickly, we'll jump back to our bar chart here, and we'll just have a quick look at Vega. So Vega both have websites, and you can see here there are some examples, but let's hop in and have a look. So if we look at our examples page with Vega, there's a whole bunch of things that are already built that we can take a look at. There's all kinds of charts that you may have seen in Power BI, you may not have seen in Power BI, but it gives you an idea of the kind of thing you can start to do. And look, if you're crazy enough to do it, there's Pac-Man and various other things. But let's take a look at that bar chart. So instead of, this is what we see. And instead of writing a lot of JavaScript, we start to build up a more natural, what we call declarative set of steps. So here's our data. Here's our scales. So how we encode those values to the X and Y physical coordinates, the axes, and then our marks. So this is still quite a mouthful. But if we want to know more about this language, we can look in the documentation. And all these things are, for time, we won't delve into them, but all these things are easy enough to go through and with enough time. Vega-Lite is a fair bit easier, but you can still see it's quite powerful, and it does most common use cases quite well. So if we click on the examples, we can see we've got bar charts of varying kinds. We've got histograms and density plots. We've got scatter plots, various line chart type scenarios, area chart, and so on and so forth. We've got quite a lot of stuff we can still do. And if we look in the bar chart example, we can see it's really just, probably about 10 lines of code. I say code, but I'm going to use code and JSON interchangeably. But we can see that this chart works using a very simple amount of JSON code. So most of it is our data. We've got the directive to draw a bar, which is the mark we want to draw. And we have, let me just zoom in a bit, sorry. That was a little silly of me. And we have our encoding channel, which maps the X and Y channels to our data. So we've got our field A and our field B, and this produces a chart. So we'll just copy that for a second. Now brings us to Deneb. So the idea with Deneb is we want to bring the Vega languages into Power BI. So just a little bit about why it's called Deneb, because some people ask and some people don't, but why not? We'll tell you. Vega have kind of claimed this sort of area here. They have the Vega and Vega-Lite languages. They also have a tool called Lyra, which is the constellation that Vega the star sits in. We also have Altair here, which is a version of Vega-Lite that runs inside Python. So if we head back to the Vega-Lite website, we also have Altair, which is declarative visualization in Python, and we can see it looks very similar. So both of these stars form what's known as an asterism known as a summer triangle. And Deneb was free, so I basically took it. And fortunately, the Vega and Altair folks have been very kind in giving me their blessing with that, which is really nice. So the idea is that Deneb brings the languages to Power BI in a similar way that Altair brings them to Python. So let's actually show it, because we've talked a lot about why we've got here, but often it's important to understand what we're trying to do. So Deneb, I have loaded in my report, but it is a custom visual that is available in AppSource in the usual way. So you can click Get More Visuals, and we can do a search for Deneb. And we can see it's here, and it's written by me. But I'm really just providing the languages that other people have put a lot more work into. So we can click on the visual. We can click Add. I won't worry about it too much now because I've already got it loaded, but this is how we would add it. But there's also the sample workbook that I've put together that shows a little bit more about how it works. I guess one of the key things is it is certified. So as a custom visual, that's quite a good thing from my perspective as an author, because it means that it's been reviewed internally by Microsoft and they're happy enough to put that stamp on it. But what it does mean for you is it's a way of you being able to build your own bespoke visualizations inside Power BI that would be regarded as certified. So if I were to go and develop a custom visual on my own, package it up as a PBI viz, and publish that to AppSource, it would not be certified until I went through the process. So one of the things I really wanted to do was make sure that if I give you a means of, cutting down that time, how can you get the benefits? So that's what we did. And fortunately, Microsoft were really helpful in that regard. So when we've got our visual loaded, we would click on it, and it's given me a very big space because that's how my text boxes were sized. But once we're added to the canvas, we've got a visual that we can use. It's a very simple landing page. It's not doing anything very exciting. And what we basically have to do is start adding data. And one of the big differences between Deneb versus another visual is you have to start thinking using tables as your basis. So, earlier we started here. We had our country code and our sales. This is how we need to start thinking when we've got a custom visual that's so flexible in its design. We don't expose axis, small multiple, measure, legend as fields you can drag things into, because that's very with Power BI visuals, you have to declare those things before you build the visual. So we don't know what a visual is going to look like theoretically. So we have something very similar to table. We have a values role where we add our values to, much like the table does. So we have our values, our country code, and our sales. So what I'm going to do is drag, let's just expand this out. This is just the financial data that comes with Power BI modeled into a star schema. So let's add our country code, and we'll see the visual changes slightly. Now it says we need a specification, but just bear with me. We'll just add our sales. We've got 2 fields. Now in the visual header, we have the option to open an advanced editor, which is what happens with visuals like Charticulator, the Infographic Designer, Power KPI Matrix, and so on. And what this lets us do as authors is expose a more advanced interface. So right now, it's the first time we've opened the visual. We've got this dialog, which lets us try and create a template or import one. But for now, we're just going to close that down. And this is basically just a carbon copy of what we saw in the report. This area, this dotted area, is our visual. It's our visual's physical size, I should say. Now we can't programmatically change this, so this is a way of showing you what the visual will look like when you go back to your report. So right now we don't have anything in here, so I'm going to paste. Let's go back and copy that. My clipboard. I copied something in Power BI, didn't I? Yeah. Let's paste that in. So we've got a specification here that we just took from the Vega-Lite website, and I'm just going to come into the properties and I'm going to change the editor size slightly. So we should be able to see a little bit more in here. Now, if I click the apply button, it's going to produce a bar chart that looks basically the same as the one we saw. And the reason is because it's got the same data and everything else. But that's not really much use for us in Power BI because our data can change and it can be assigned. So let's work this bit out here. So we'll remove these two lines because we don't need those. Now, I guess it's important to note that the schema is something that gives structure to the JSON that we put in. So JSON is quite a simple format, but it can be very extensible. And the schema is basically the language. But because we package the language in with Deneb, we don't need to worry about that. And that's one of the neat things about it is the whole visual contains everything you need. So if you were to deploy this in a publish to web scenario or a mobile report, everything you do here will look the same, which is kind of neat. And we'll get rid of the description. It's probably worth noting that descriptions are quite good because they help with screen readers and accessibility. But for now, we'll simplify things. And then the last thing is we want to take the data out, which is hard-coded as some values. What we're going to do is we're going to put in name dataset. Whoops. Now this is something that happens if you import a visual or create a visual. So you don't have to remember to do this, but this is a link to the values over here. So by doing this, we pass those in as something that's called dataset. And now we're telling Vega-Lite to use our dataset. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the repair button to tidy this up. And you can see it's applied the changes, but at the minute, nothing's really there, which is not exciting. But the reason is that if we look at our X value, our field is called A, but we don't have a field called A. We have country code or sales. So what I can do is I can delete that and I can start to type. And I've now got an autocomplete for country code. So I can pop that in. And let's just run that and see what happens. At the minute, nothing's really happening because at the minute it still looks for B. So let's fix up our sales. And we can see we've got our measure appear here because that's in the data set. So we click run and we've now got a very simple bar chart with our country code and our sales. So just very quickly, what we've done is we've bound our X channel, which is our horizontal channel, to the country code. It's got a type of nominal. So one thing we have to do is to tell Vega-Lite what the data type is because it tries to infer it, and it's not always correct. And by default, it thinks it's a nominal value. And when we talk about nominal, that's like a dimension, a discrete categorical field, like country code. We could delete that from this one, and it will still work. But if we were to look at our sales measure, that has a type of quantitative. And what that means is it means it's basically a linear value. So it's drawn this axis from 0 to $1.1 billion. And if we were to take that out, it's going to think it's the same as this one. That's its default behavior. So if we apply that, what it's done is it's treated those sales measures as columns. And we don't want that. So what we have to do is just give it a little bit of help and say quantitative. But basically what we've done is we've built a bar chart that binds to our Power BI data in a few lines of JSON. And if we didn't like it that way around, because from a data viz perspective, that's probably not the right way to do things, we would probably flip it around because it makes a lot more sense to put it on the y-axis and flip the sales to the x-axis. All we did was changed the encoding assignments, and that flips it around and turns it sideways. So with encoding, we can look at that in the documentation for Vega-Lite. Hello.
Hey, Daniel, just really quick, we've had a couple questions come through.
Yep.
We got one from Jeff. Jeff, you want to come off mute and ask it?
I'll probably ask this the last time you get this presentation.
Hey, Jeff.
Daniel. Hey, mate. I forgot what my question was now. Is that measure name hard-coded in any way, or is it the measure name or the friendly name?
That's the display name. So it matches the display name. So what happens if I were to change that to sales and pressed enter? What basically will happen is there's a disconnect. So with visuals, and this is probably an important thing to note. So I really appreciate the question. This here is our data model. You know, we use this to build visuals up, but this is where the data from our data model goes. Now, our visual only knows about this. It's not allowed to look at the data model for security reasons. So we're not allowed to know in a visual more about the data than we should. So Power BI passes a data set that matches this, country code and sales. But in our spec, we had sales. But what we can do is we can remap it. Because what Deneb does is it looks at what's in use, and if you change something over, it lets you map it back. So we can see we've changed it now to sales, and if we just delete this out and start typing, we can see the measure name has changed to reflect that as well. So this is something that we can't necessarily control due to permissions, but we try to minimize it from a productivity perspective. And similarly, if I've got my country code here, and I wanted to put, say, product in. Now I'm going to drag product in, and it's not easy to see, but we've got this little zoom thing here. There's these little artifacts here. And the reason is because if you think of our visual as a table, it's now got an extra level of grain. So what I could do is I could delete country code out and assign it to my product. And I've now got a chart that maps to my product. So we try where we can to improve this, reduce this friction where we can. And it's early days, we've still got a long way to go, but this is just a simple thing we can do. But yes, it's not hard coded, but it is based on the display name that comes through.
Is there any kind of implications?
You could go back and, what's that?
Sorry, Daniel. Is there any implications for using it with calculation groups?
I doubt it will work with calculation groups because calculation groups aren't well supported by custom visuals. I think that's just changed in Power BI Feb. But calculation groups conventionally, that there's not a lot of support there. So okay. I, for the moment, would assume not, but it's on my list of things to check. What this may actually, calculation groups have a place that you may find that you may not need calculation groups for some scenarios as well. That's the other thing. Sometimes you might use calculation groups to work around limitations with core visuals, or you may, that's maybe something you want, but you might actually be able to achieve what you want just with the directives inside the language. So we might show you a couple of things today. We may not get time, but I'll try and show you a couple of things that may assuage that. But I'm hoping that, I'd love to get calculation group support in here. But it's literally just come out this month, and there's not a lot of doc on it. So I have to go through that and find out. But until this month, custom format strings, for instance, aren't supported. And so we've got to look at that. Great. Because I'm a bit neat, I'm going to change that back. Hopefully that answers your question, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. We do have one more, Daniel, from Tom. Tom, would you like to come off mute? Or do you want me to ask it?
No, I can ask it. This is great, Daniel. This looks awesome. But I was wondering, are there row limits? Like we have row limits when you're working in R and Python. Does that same technical limitation apply to using the custom viz with Deneb?
The short answer is it depends. So the key thing with, yes, there are row limits. That's probably the quickest answer to give you. With R and Python, you've got 150K row limit. With custom visuals that are written using the proper supported SDK, it's 30,000 rows out of the box, but you can write in support for additional rows. So what happens is, not that this data set has it, but in the properties, there's something called data limit options, and there's the option to override the row limit. So what we can do is we can ask if your data set contains more than, so Deneb uses batches of 10,000 rows. So by default, the visual will use 10,000 rows. If you turn this on and your query has more than that, it will recursively load rows from the data model in batches of 10,000. Now, it can get up to something a lot more than the R and Python visuals can get, but there are downsides to that. So the key downside is that DAX and the analytical side of Power BI is not really optimized for data sets like that. It's not like SQL. So if you put a big data set in, it can take a long time to get the data out from the data model. So I've got, I've got some, the visual itself will render it quite quickly, but you might be sat there for a while. I've had a use case where I've got a couple of million rows out of the model, but it's taken about 20 minutes to load, and that's just the DAX. That's nothing to do with the visual. So it can be done, but it should be used sparingly. And then the other thing as well is, with a lot of data points in here, it's the equivalent to having a lot of visuals on your page. It creates a lot of elements in the DOM, and that can have performance impacts. So what's kind of neat with Deneb is we have the ability to render as SVG, so scalable vector graphics, which are crisp at any resolution. So you can see the zooming is really nice here. Or I can render it as canvas, which is a different method, but you can see it's gone a little bit blurry. If I put it to 100%, it looks just fine. But if I zoom in, it gets a bit fuzzy. And that's basically a static image, much like the R Python visuals. But some of the stuff we've got down here, which we'll hopefully get to, still works. So, but that can improve performance with big data sets. But honestly, Power BI itself is perhaps not optimized for that kind of stuff. So it makes it harder to support, but we do have the ability to do it. And I've just worked on a project for a customer where we've actually been using that quite well. We've been doing like 40,000 row data sets just fine, but their data model is really well optimized for that. So if you look at the DAX that gets run, we don't have control over that. It's doing a whole bunch of top ends by Windows, so it can get quite slow, and it depends on the size of your fact tables and various other things. So it becomes a difficult question quite quickly, but we do support it. So hopefully that gives you something to think about there. I didn't actually talk about it. We have a website for Deneb, which is in the links. You can actually go into the data set, and there is a section on this for more detail. So it shows what happens if you turn it on.
Great.
So you can learn a little bit more about it.
Thanks.
But there is also a page that details performance considerations, and you do need to think about things like necessary columns and measures and the amount of marks you put on the page. So there's not much we can do about that to mitigate it. So it's one of those things where, we're giving you a lot of power, but with great power comes great responsibility. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I need my Spider-Man shirt for that.
Yeah. It's one of these things where we're giving you a lot of stuff, but at the same time you have to do a bit more thinking about that as well. That's one of the pros about having these things here is they've been optimized for specific things. So we say you can't do this and you can't do that, but these things are really well tuned. So yes, we're building a bar chart here. Bar charts aren't exciting when we're showing off a tool like this, but they're really good to communicate how you can start thinking visually. So that's why we're sticking with simple stuff today. But yeah, you can start to add in more complicated things. And hopefully if I get time, I'll show you one that I did with a lot more data points in. We won't be able to dive into it, but I'll show you the kind of things you can produce. This is entry level stuff, but you can do some pretty interesting stuff with it.
Looks cool.
Lovely, thank you. So what I will just do, are we good to carry on? I'm going to assume that's a yes. Okay.
That's a yes. Sorry, I stepped away for just a second. Thank you guys for the questions.
No, thank you. I love talking about this thing. So as long as you don't mind me carrying on, I'm happy to talk about it all day.
Yeah, we couldn't tell. We really couldn't.
So going back to the, we were just picking up on the encoding channels. So Vega-Lite has a language reference that you can follow down. So it's actually got transformations. So it's almost got a mini Power Query inside the tool as well. So you can actually start doing some pretty cool stuff there, but we may not get to that today. Documentation for the marks. So we can see we had a bar, but there's various other kinds you can add in. So there's circles and arcs and areas and lines and whatnot. The encoding is where we were just looking at. So these are all the things you can actually bind data to. So we can actually do some pretty neat stuff, but we can actually also have, if we look in it, a marks configuration, it also gives us the other encodings we can use. So with the bar, we can bind the width or the height. We can also bind where are the position channels? Come on. They're not down. Oh, it's in the usual mark. Sorry. Start with the mark. These are all the general stuff. So we've got position channels, so X, X2, width, height, Y, Y2, that kind of thing. So Y and Y2 and X2 are quite cool because it means you can actually specify ranges. So you could do ranged bar charts or Gantt charts and things like that as well that don't start from 0. So you can start thinking about different visual scenarios quite easily. And it's just a case of adding in another channel. So, if we put in, say, the profit, not that this is a good idea, by the way, if we add our profit in, so we've got our sales here, what's the gap between sales and profit? We could add in X2 and we just type in field profit. And we could run that and we can now see the chart moves away from 0. But what might be better is we change that to a rule instead of a bar. And that looks almost like a dumbbell chart. But what we could do is if we like the idea of this, we could actually add point marks onto these things as well. So I'm going to do another example with that in a moment. So I'm just going to be good and stick with the script. So let's take profit out for a second. But like I say, bar chart's not very exciting. But what we could start doing is thinking about maybe we could compact this down a bit. But before we do that, let's just do one thing because I need to try and get as much as I can out of my head. We talked briefly about interactivity. We actually have the ability to, because this is something that runs in the same visual layer, the web layer that Power BI uses is not R or Python, we can actually start leveraging some of the things that we can do in normal visuals. So things like tooltips and context menus and cross-filtering. So by default, we have the tooltip enabled and the context menu. So if I were to right click on Paseo, I can see that I can include or exclude it. But actually, let's swap country code back. And instead of deleting the field, I can also use this dialog here to swap it around. And we'll just delete product out. There we go. So I actually have a drill through page in my report that works off country. So let's just back out a second. If I click on Mexico, I could drill through. And I've got my Mexico drill through page. So I can start thinking about, we attach the same IDs to these data points that the table rows have. So if your data points match the same grain, they will have the same kind of bindings that a core visual might have. And if we had, say, what we can do as well is with our mark, we can actually decorate that as a JSON object. So rather than just saying it's a bar, we can say it's a type bar, and we can attach other properties to it. So we can say add a tooltip to it. So now what we've said is enable this mark for a tooltip. Now at the minute we haven't saved it, so nothing's happening. But if I apply, there's an error because I am an idiot and I didn't put a comma in. Now I could have repaired that, but I'll just fix that up. So now I can hover over the US and actually have a report page tooltip. So it's picked up my US report page tooltip and my Mexico and my France and my Germany and so on and so forth. And also, if I didn't want to use my report page tooltip, I could turn that off. And now I've got my modern tooltip and the drill through page comes up. So we're able to resolve those data points back to what Power BI sends through. And that's one of the key complexities of building a custom visual is adding that in. We're actually trying to make that easier. The other one is cross-filtering. So this is off. And the reason it's off is because when we do cross-filtering in a visual, when we click on a bar, it dims the other bars. Well, that's actually a little bit of logic from our side that we have to think about. So we don't want to turn this on and confuse our readers. We want to make it opt-in. So by turning on cross-filtering, I could just click back out. And I've got my table here. This is not exciting, but it'll prove the point. I can click on Canada, and I can see that that's updated. And I can control-click on my bars, and my cross-filtering works. But there's no visual effects here. And the reason is I actually have to do a bit of work to tell Deneb what it should look like. This is something that as a developer we have to do. What I'll do very quickly is there's the ability to turn on debugging, which is in the documentation. I'm just going to gloss over it for now. I can hover over a data point, and let me just turn up the tooltip text size a bit. When I hover over my Germany, I've got this little field here called selected, and it says neutral. So what we're doing under the hood is Power BI passes us details, and we have to signal to Power BI what's been clicked on. So this is what we use to do that. So at the minute it says neutral, and this is logic we deal with for you. This is all in the documentation, but we handle this on your behalf. So if I click on Germany now, nothing's changed. But if I hover over the tooltip, it's not going to do it, is it? Because I'm demoing. There we go. It says selected on. And if I hover over Canada, it says selected off. So what we can do, and for time, I'm just going to copy paste this in. But to give you an idea, you can actually add logical tests like ifs and so on. And they can be quite complicated. But for now, all we're going to do is add in on the opacity encoding. So that's how solid a shape is. If that field is off, then make it 30% opaque. Otherwise, it's solid, which is 1 or 100%. So if I run this, it immediately shows the changes. So I hover over Germany, and my selected is on, and Canada is off, and Mexico is off. And if I click on France, that's on, Germany's off, and so on and so forth. So we'll put that back to old user-friendly reader mode. So it's doing what we think, and the formatting's all there and everything else. But now I have a visual that, has those visual effects, but I have to think as an author what I'm going to do. But what it does mean is you can actually do other things. So instead of having, this transparency, you can actually draw a solid line, or you can encode some other aspect of it based on that. So you can start thinking about things that can help encode visuals to your readers. Obviously, you don't want to stray too far from other visuals, but there's quite a bit you can do. But what we'll do very quickly is we'll get onto the concept of layering, because bars aren't very exciting. But let's say we wanted to build a more compact bar. What I can do is I can pass in the concept of a layer. And this is a repeating element known as an array. And inside that, I will add my mark. And I'm just going to drag this in here and repair it. So now what I have is an entry for my mark, and that still does exactly the same thing. But let's say now that I want to pop in, I want to move this off the axis into here, and I'll do that with a label. So let's add a new entry, and I'll add another mark, and I'll put type text. And what I want to do is for the encoding of that mark, I want to encode its text property to the country code field. And I'll click run. And it's not easy to see. Let's just zoom in a bit. It's at the end. And the reason it's at the end is because the X encoding is shared by all the layers. So what I could do is I can pass in one lower down that says, I can actually say it's 0. So what it's going to do is it's going to move it all the way back to the beginning. And what I might want to do then is start customizing parts of that property. So this is getting quite hard to see, and it's not where we want it. So let's change its alignment, to left. And let's make its color white. And let's make its font size 20. And let's nudge it in a little bit more. So DX lets us nudge a little bit. So what we've now got is this nice 0 aligned with a little bit of padding label that's got a white color, and now we don't need this axis. So let's turn off the y-axis. So in here, instead of this label angle, which we don't really need, let's just turn that off. So now we have an x-axis that's nice and compact. And let's think about the label. You know, we could put labels on the end as well. So let's add another text. And in that marks encoding, we'll say its text, whoops, is mapped to the sales field. So if we apply this now that uses that X value from higher up because we haven't got an X encoding, but it doesn't look great. And the reason it doesn't look great is because we have to work with raw numbers as they're passed in. So Power BI, we can see with the tooltips, we've got these nice formatted ones because we're able to do some work under the hood for that. But when we're working with raw values, we want to give you the raw number because if it's formatted, it doesn't treat it like a number. But we can fix that. That's okay. So in our text, we actually have a formatter that's built in. So when you format a number, if any of you are familiar with Charticulator or D3, you can pass in, say, something like this, which is a format string, which changes. Actually, let's just align that so it's off the end of the bar. That's not fun to read. So, and let's just bring that across a bit. So we can see now it's at the end of the bar, and maybe we'll copy that font size and the X from above. Now we can do things like style this with enough time, but we've bumped that off the end and it's got a bit of space. And that is something you might need to look up. But if you know how Power BI works, you might want to use Power BI format strings. So we actually have what's known as a custom formatter, which we can pass in the Power BI format syntax. We just have to tell Vega that we're using Power BI formatting. And if I pass this in, what I'm basically saying is make it x.1 decimal place billion. So let's apply that. And we've now got a Power BI format string applied to our labels. And this axis doesn't really matter anymore. So we can copy that and put it down here. So we've now got a nice compact bar chart. And maybe we want to change the bar chart so it's sorted more sensibly. So let's change our y-axis. And we can start passing in all kinds of things. We can say sort by sales in descending order, and we can sort by other fields or aggregates or various other things. But for now and for time, I'm just going to put this in. Now it sorts it the way we expect. And this is one little thing here around the edge. And this is something that Vega does by default. It draws a square around what's called the view. So we're just going to change that. To transparent. And that's just going to turn that off. So we'll jump back out. And now we've got this nice little compact bar chart, which we can drag and resize. And Power BI just gave me an error off screen, so I'm hoping it doesn't die. But I can make a nice compact little chart and stick it somewhere if I wanted to. So I've immediately started to prototype and iterate my design, and evolved it to something that, in this case is what I'm doing, but I could do a bit more with sufficient time. But just very quickly, I'll show you that there are faster ways to do things, and I'll copy that table because I'll convert it into a visual. And I'll just show you the other way because we did that from scratch. So if I edit my visual, I have the ability to choose some simple templates. So if I click on a bar chart, I package these in, but also people are now starting to create their own templates, and these are starting to become published on people's sites. I do have some links for that in a moment, but let's just do a simple bar chart. And let's do our country code and our sales and click create. And this is a simple one that we build in that basically looks like the one we created manually, but with all the interactivity stuff built in. But we've also got in this, in that tab that we use to do styling, that let me just biff the size up, sorry. we started to put some things in. I've gone through and built a set of themes in here that matches Power BI pretty well. So for the Power BI defaults, we actually have like the grid lines with the dots and various other things. The purpose of this is to give you an idea just how much you can configure. So this is some stuff, but there's even more. But we pop this out and we've now got a bar chart that basically gives us a place to start. So even though we built that from scratch, we could start with another one and so on and so forth. The other thing we can do, we can do heaps and heaps of things. I'm conscious of time. So what I might do is I might just do a quick copy paste because I was going to build one up from scratch. But
you've got time, Daniel.
Oh, I've got time. Okay, well let's go then.
Rush.
So we've done X and Y, and we've done text and various other things, but we can start thinking about other scenarios. So I'll just move this down and out of the way. Let's add a new visual. And this one, I'll just want to show a couple of possibilities. And the possibilities are almost as unlimited as your imagination, basically. Let's add in our country code again. And let's add in our sales again.
Oh, maybe I missed this question. I'm sorry, but
Fire away.
Fernando asked, is that JSON doesn't accept document text, does it?
I don't think I quite followed that. Sorry, what was the question?
Fernando, do you want to come off mute for and give that in more detail? I know Tom's got another question too.
No, it's only documenting the code.
What's that?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch
the
that.
code. Documenting the code.
Do you mean comments?
Yes.
No, JSON is designed for portability, so it doesn't have that. But what you can do, and this is dependent on how you want to use it. Let's go in here. What we've got the option of doing is, let's say in this layer, we want to explain what this is. We have a description property, and we can say, this is the main bar, and down here we can say, this is the label. Pardon my typing and talking at the same time, but hopefully you get the idea. This is the label for the country code, and that's probably the way the authors have recommended it, because JSON, it is possible to get JSON with comments, but it's not a standard accepted JavaScripty way of doing it. So you can use description. You can also use name. So you could also give it a name which is like an ID. So it could be like country code label. And the thing you got to think about with these, though, as well, is they help with things like screen readers. So what might be the way to do it is, one of the neat things about this is you can export the template. I won't fill all the details out, but you can actually get copy the template to the clipboard and source control it. So you might be able to apply something with, if you're using, say, Git or something, you could possibly have some accompanying documentation there. But no, it's not, unfortunately, not designed for things like comments. That's one of the downsides. So yes, with an R or a Python visual, you could put comments in. It could be, if it's something you think could be valuable, we may be able to expose another option for you to add some documentation. So when we do the template, we do actually give the ability to provide a short description. But it may be possible for us to think about how we can help you. But what we want to do is keep this as pure as possible when it comes to the Vega and Vega-Lite compatibility. We don't want to put too much in here that makes it hard to move elsewhere. One of the neat things about this is you should be able to copy paste it into some other tool that uses Vega-Lite, and it should work. So if you wanted some additional metadata, what I would probably suggest here is, if you're using the visual, it's very tedious. Windows 11 breaks my taskbar. Deneb has a GitHub repository, and you can create issues. So if there's a feature you want, I'm happy to consider it as part of the product.
Straight from the source. Look at that.
So it's probably important to note that this is only as useful as people that use it. So when I started building this, it was really for me. So, you know, a bit of background. I get approached a lot of the time to build custom visuals for people, but then I tell them how much it costs, and then they don't talk to me again. So
I felt that pain too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, so it's honestly, for me, this helps my productivity a lot. And what I found was it was a quick way for me to build, prototype, and test things, but it actually turned out to become quite viable as a product. So I've spent the last 18 months or so just refining it to something that I can share. So the goal is that, you know, if people are using it and people want things, I'm happy to, you know, to kind of product manage that and try and do it in the best way for everybody. That's one of the other things we have to think about, is pleasing as many people as we can. But, you know, we've already had version 1.1 come out, and this is where that field mapping thing came from. So somebody wanted this, so it made a lot of sense, so we built it in. They've also asked for report theme support, which we've done. I won't be able to look at that today, but we're trying to add things in. You know, 1.2 is coming out soon. There'll be some new stuff in there that will, again, help evolve the visual. So it doesn't have everything yet, but if there's things you want, please ask. I may not be able to give them to you. There are some limits that custom visuals have, but we'll do our best, you know, because we want it to be useful for you.
Funny you mentioned themes, because that's exactly what Tom was going to ask.
I'll do a very, very quick pivot to the sample workbook, because you can see this in the sample workbook, and there's also there's a documentation page that you can look at. Pattern fills. Pattern fills are good. I won't do that. Color schemes. So if you click on the color schemes, there is a way to bind custom shading into the language. So we actually add custom schemes in that support the language and bind to the theme. So if we configure our theme up this way, which is the standard, we can pass that in, and it will stick. So it uses, and that's a terrible chart, don't get me wrong, but it's just for example. You shouldn't really do that with a bar chart. Similar thing with ordinal scales as well, and the diverging scales. These all use the theme from Power BI. But again, we've had somebody ask for more functionality around that, so that's hopefully coming up in maybe 1.3. So like I say, this is new, but we're going to keep evolving things. But just to show you that in action, the sample workbook has basically, what you just saw. So here are the themes, just basically as you saw them. And if I were to go to the theme designer, I'm just going to change themes for time. But let's just say this lovely one here with the background that you probably wouldn't use. You know, my visuals all update to use that palette. And this one's probably a little more simple. You know, so that I can change a part of the theme and it will update, which is kind of cool. What it doesn't do yet is expose the colors, and that's something that somebody asked for that we'll hopefully work on, you know, in a future update. But in terms of just binding to your theme, we're starting to work on that. Yeah.
Daniel, it's amazing what you've built. I was just saying, I mean, comparing what I've seen in Charticulator to this, I mean, this is so elegant.
Would it be more beneficial to show a couple of more aspirational things rather than do some basic stuff? Because I've got a couple of examples I can show you where I've really pushed it.
What does the crowd say? We're seeing some thumbs up. We're seeing some claps. I think that's a green light.
Okay. So what I'll do first of all, actually, I'm going to throw some props up to another person in the community who helped me a lot with pushing this forward. So I don't know if you know Kerry Kolosko. She does the Workout Wednesday stuff now. She's another MVP, but she's somebody that really helped me evolve Deneb for the public preview in version 1. So she has a page in this workbook where she's built custom KPI cards where each one of these is a Deneb visual, and each one is subtly different, but she's shown it as a way of prototyping different ideas and showing what they're like. So you can start, this is an example of layering and putting many data points in. So we've got a simple bullet chart, we've got a spark line, we've got positive and negative shaded bars. We've got a lollipop chart with conditional shading. You know, with this, if we change the KPI targets, one of these will change. Oh, it's the wrong way. You know, so she's got pretty cool stuff happening. And this is a mixture of, one of the neat things about this is she's not just written JSON, she's written DAX measures that get passed in, and because they're dynamic, you can greatly simplify the JSON as well. So you can write measures that have some of the conditions you might need. So if you don't want to use more of the language, you can use, if you're comfortable with DAX, you can use that. So, and that's almost one of the things we did with. I'm going to jump around all over the place now. This one here, this uses a table that looks like this. So we've got some very simple fields. Oh, hello.
Did somebody have a question, or was that just inadvertent? I'll go with inadvertent.
Okay. So we've got a very simple table. We've got a category and a value and some flags, and they get passed in, and they drive the position of these labels, because we put custom visuals quite close, so we want them to show underneath. We want Deneb to stand out. So we've got columns and values that we pass in, and we do conditional stuff based on that. So if I open this up, I've got a few layers in here, and I can have layers within layers. And I've got styling. This is called complexity. So if I look in my config and I look down and find complexity, it's 100 size, it's got 0 border around it, and it's filled in. So we can start to change, if I want to change the size of that complexity thing to say 300, then it's not really doing anything because reasons. But oh, hang on a sec. That's a bit of a dumb one. Let's try the font weight of the banding label. If I want that to be, say, 900, then this gray text down here has got really thick. If I wanted it to be very, very thin, I could change it to 100. So this is changing how bold it is, and I can give these styles, so I can abstract away a lot of things. So this is, pretty much everything in here is built with Deneb. There's no other visuals in here. This example we saw here, each one of these is a Deneb visual that I've used to illustrate my points. But something a little more aspirational. I recently did, so if you're aware of storytelling with data, Cole Nussbaum and Netflix monthly competitions and books and numerous other things. This is something that I built and submitted. So this is a whole report page with 3 Deneb visuals in. So there's a slicer here. This is actually bookmarked. This is a slicer that sets dates. So what I have here is I built a radial chart that actually has a hover effect on it. So I can hover over data points. And what this shows is it's based off the NASA surface temperature analysis. So they get, every month, they get all the measuring stations around the world, and they aggregate the temperatures based on this baseline period between 1951 and 1980, and how far of those temperatures strayed from that baseline. So what I sort of did was built this sort of ring of a tree type thing, where our months are around the angular axis, and our radial axis is the year. And we can see that, we go backwards, it's a lot colder. In the period of, baselining, it's kind of fairly light, and then it gets quite red quite quickly. But what I can do is I can click on this one, and I've built some logic to harvest all of these data points and cross-filter the scatter plot, which is also a Deneb visual, to show only those data points. And I've also done custom, we changed the opacity of that bar chart. But when I hover, I've changed the condition of the data point to magnify it, so I can see where it is. And then down here, I've got this little compact seasonality chart, which is also a Deneb visual, because unfortunately the core visual doesn't do more than 6 small multiples wide. So this is just a very simple line chart. And again, it's got a little hover effect and another mark to show us where we are with the tooltip. So each one of these is a Deneb visual. So if these are a bit, we're kind of going from 0 to 150 pretty quick. But just to give you an idea, I'm actually doing some dynamic calculations in here. So if you want to get smart and step outside the basic language, you can actually, there's an expression language in here that exposes a whole bunch of stuff, like the height and the width of the plot. So what I've been able to do here is dynamically calculate the radius of the circle, so that I can position marks based on it further down. Now, you obviously don't have to do this, but this is something you can do if you're so inclined. And what I have here is a transform. So we actually have the ability to add calculated columns, or pivot or unpivot our data, or various other things to also it's almost like a stream of data within a visual. I wouldn't recommend it for everything, but if you think about something like a box plot or a histogram, you need to give that visual the raw data. So you can actually use these transforms in here to do binning or regression analysis, simple regression, simple linear regression, nothing too fancy, but and then you can pass those calculations down into the layer that they're in and do other things. So you can start with, as I say, a table of data, and in one layer you can transform it down to something simple, and in another layer you can put, this is one layer with all the data points, and there's other layers that aggregate other things under the hood. This highlighted mark, for instance, is another layer that shows when it's hovered. So I can get quite detailed. I mean, this was probably about an afternoon's work of gradual building and iteration, but it's the type of storytelling that's quite hard to achieve with core visuals. Something that's a bit more straightforward in a way is something like this. So I'm going to do a little bit of a plug for Reed Havens, who you're probably familiar with. I think you mentioned you were going to have him at your in-person group.
We are, yes.
So Reed and I are going to do a deep dive in a couple of weeks on his YouTube channel, so Havens Consulting, where he's built a Google Analytics report, and it's a heat map. And what he's got is he's got a matrix, and he's got two bar charts that he's lined up. But what we've been able to do is turn that into a single Deneb visual. And one of the neat things we can do is we've gone through and shown you that stuff that about the selected states and everything else. And we've been able to build these marginal bars. Basically, it looks like the same visual, but it's a single visual, and we can click on the bars and have them cross highlight these other visuals. We can click on an individual one, and so on and so forth. So if you spend a little bit of time, once you've got the basic construct out, you can actually combine different charts and aggregate them down. So this is a single data set with, if we look in here, it looks like this. We've got our hours of the day, we've got our days of the week, and we've got our two measures, and we've been able to build this using a single specification. So I'll hold off on showing my tricks with that one, because Reed and I will be spending a good hour or so showing you how to think about it, how to approach that. And then the Deneb website, because my taskbar is dead. So on the Deneb website, which is denebviz.github.io, which is available through the visual in the app source listing, and I can provide the links as well. We have a community page, which is starting to build up as well, which is quite nice. So there's a resources and examples page here, and that Kerry's site, Kerry's visuals that I just showed you, she has a website where she's building some really neat stuff with Deneb. So I helped her recently on the concept of a rain cloud plot, which is kind of like a violin plot, box plot, and scatter plot all in one. And that's a single visual that does all that. Faceted plots that we can actually assign coordinates to. So this is like a US type layout. This one was really cool. So this was a slope chart, but it actually also has an interpolated detail line. It's quite hard to show on this page, but you can see it's not just a slope chart, but it's actually got a series line underneath it as well. So you can actually provide that context. And she's got some really great ideas, and she does a lot of exploration, and she shares what she learns. So if we were to look at, say, this one's quite interesting. This is a remix of a Data is Beautiful subreddit post with Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend's post. So this was the original one, and she's been basically working through it. This is the recreation in Deneb, and then she's got the example published to web. Doesn't always work for me on Teams, unfortunately, but she's got the report embedded. You can see here it's wanting to come up, and then she goes down here and explains her working. So she's providing a lot of service to people that want to learn, because my challenge is I have to develop the visual. I don't have a lot of, coming here today and promoting has been great, because I don't get to talk about it much anymore. But there are people out there that are much better than I am at showcasing it. Kerry is one such person. Another person is Jose Escalante, who has a really good playlist where he's exploring the visual. It's mostly Spanish, but it's a great playlist to follow. Ben Ferry, Power BI guy, he's got a playlist. So we're starting to build up, what we're getting from around the community. We're starting to pull together here, so that there's more resources for you. There's also a couple of template repositories. So Mike Carlo from Power BI.tips, he's got a GitHub repository where he's collecting and encouraging people to post templates to. And also Enterprise DNA, if you're familiar with them, they actually have a sub forum on their forum where they're posting a bunch of examples as well. So what's really nice is if we were to choose, say, let's look at the, oh, he's got a heat map with marginal bars as well. Greg, the guy who does a lot of this stuff, he often goes into quite a bit of detail. He sometimes records a video. So there's people out there that are really trying to help other people. And this is the most exciting thing for me is, the knowledge is just locked to me. We're able to get more people thinking about this stuff and doing visualization or thinking a bit more about it. So, yeah,
I love this. I hope more community members can help contribute and share. I mean, this is my first time like really getting an understanding, Daniel. So anything I can do to help, share the message. Happy to do it.
Yeah. So here's another one I threw together, which is largely thanks to Kerry, but there was a great. I think it was the Wall Street Journal did a really neat article. So I published to web. It does work. Just sometimes needs a kick. There we go. Where I built this faceted bar chart using Deneb. So it was a test of cross filtering. So I can cross filter by facet or by individual bar. And I built this little legend out of the Deneb visual as well. So it's kind of fun. I like it, but it's practical too. We're able to start doing some pretty neat things. And as I say, I do a little bit of work the rest of the week when I'm not working with DiscoverEI, where I'm helping people use Deneb in a professional capacity to actually produce visuals where they're struggling with R or Python or other visuals. So it's pretty cool to be a part of.
I have to say, Daniel, typically when I hear customers or partners saying, hey, we want to go a custom visual route, I tell them do not do that, unless you want pain and suffering and just a lot of effort. For going this route though is totally makes sense, right? I mean, the fact that they don't have a lot to maintain, you don't have to do a bunch of pro code and production. It just makes so much sense.
Absolutely, yeah, completely agree. I mean, as I say, I have a huge vested interest in building visuals, but when it comes to the commercial side of it, it's quite hard to, most of my opportunities don't pan out because they're expensive and they require a lot of, sometimes we can't just hand them over to people on the team there. Something like this is a little bit more, where somebody's happy to do a visual in R, they could be happy to do a visual here. So there's quite a few opportunities here. And like I say, I'm collecting things, but again, I'm happy if you have a resource that you want to make me aware of, because I'm not able to find them all. I do vanity Google every now and again, but you can create an issue in the visualization, the documentation repository, and I'll add those in. So
it's a great
trying to build a community.
Great point, because I think Tara, she had a suggestion, and she could, Tara, if you want to come off mute, maybe mention it, and then it sounds like that's the area she would add it in your GitHub comments.
Yeah, please fire away.
Yeah, so what I was thinking about, I guess, is that, in terms of code documentation and everything and the pros and cons of having it in this case, is if the code documentation was actually kind of separate from the code and referenceable side along or that kind of thing, so where you can still have it, but you don't actually disrupt the code and the portability, the copy paste,
Yeah, so that's a great idea. So what I tend to do, because it's still early days and I'm essentially wearing all the hats. So I'm coding it, I'm documenting it, I'm project managing it, product managing it, promoting it, all the other stuff. It's a lot of work for one person. And I want people to be able to help with if they want to, the development as well. It's open source. It's, I don't mind sharing my working because, Vega and Vega-Lite are open source and free, and I want to try and keep it the same. People request things, for instance, and what I try and do is if a big feature comes along that I think is going to need a bit of work, I'm just trying to find it now. I might need to go to milestones. to 1.2, somebody asked about cross-highlight. So with custom visuals, if you want the cross-highlighting to work, it's quite different to filtering. And all of a sudden, you have to think more stuff, because once we enable it, it's at a visual level. So Deneb is the visual, not your design. So if we enable this, people have to, they got to think about it. So we don't just want to turn it on and everyone get confused. So what I try and do where I can is I open these up for discussion. I put an RFC label on them, a request for comment, and try and have a discussion around how things might work. So this is us kind of working through the ideas for how we can do cross-highlight. And some examples of spiking things up and gradually refining the functionality to try and balance it between those that want to use it and those that really don't want to use it and just want to get on. But we have limitations with the framework to think about. So this is me kind of walking through and discussing. It's mostly one-sided, but I would encourage any features like you were just talking about. If you want some kind of commenting functionality, what we would probably do is we wouldn't just knock it out and go, here you go. We'd probably think about how it best serves the product, but I'd rather do that transparently. So right now, and I did solicit some feedback from some people. So we've now got some people saying, yeah, okay, this looks good. So what we've tried to do is lay out the challenges we have and give people try and be almost democratic. So sometimes, I may have the final say, but I want to try and make sure that if people want something, we try and implement it the right way. And cross-highlighting, there's lots of things to consider. This is a development build of Deneb. So here's a core chart, and here's 4 visuals I built with Deneb that basically do the same thing with different interactions. So if we were to edit the interactions on these visuals, I can see that this bar chart will highlight this one. It will filter this one, and it will highlight this one and highlight this one. But there's, much like we did with the visual effects, we have to think about how to handle highlights because they're extra data that come through. So if we've accidentally enabled, if everyone has the default option for highlighting and they haven't set to filter, we still want to try and make it behave. So what you can see is this bottom one doesn't change because it's not been managed. This one's been fully implemented, where we've actually got sets of marks for highlights and original values. And these two are where we've tried to help you out. So what you saw on this GitHub issue is basically the evolution of that discussion. So I can't, I have a pretty good roadmap in my head, but if there are things you want, the best thing you can do is let me know. So I may not be able to, because I work on this in my free time, I may not be able to deliver it immediately, but I'm excited that there's things you want, and I'd be very happy to take this approach. And if we can make it work, we'll do our best. Sometimes there are limitations that custom visuals have that are set by Microsoft with good reason, I should point out. But we can't do everything in custom visuals that we might want. So sometimes somebody raises an issue and we can't help them, but I want to try and help where I can. But by example, if you have a good idea, please come to the repository and create an issue for it, even if it's just a quick thought you had, oh, this would be good. And we can have a discussion around it.
You're a saint, Daniel. And also, I know you've got the buy me a coffee link. I did buy some coffee. And so, Daniel's pretty much doing this, out of the goodness of open source. So Jeff, thanks for dropping that link.
Thank you. We got a couple options as well, actually. I don't want to put the cap out too much, but we have the ability to use GitHub sponsors as well. So if you want to, you can sponsor through GitHub. So you can basically choose a predefined tier. I don't expect anyone to do that. You can do a custom amount or whatever you want, if you want to. If you consider it, thank you very much. But I'm really doing this because I see there's a lot of people out there that can do a lot with this tooling, and without the burden of perhaps having to learn the web development stuff. So we're bridging the gap and helping out a lot. So yeah, I think I probably should stop talking about what I was going to talk about today, but I've basically got to the point where there's the Q&A. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly pull up the report. So there's a very, very light set of links. So basically everything I showed you can get from denebviz.github.io, including the Vega and Vega-Lite documentation. They're both available from the menu. but I permanently have this stuff open. But yeah, I kind of did. You find I monologue a lot when people ask a question, so I'd probably say, are there any more questions?
Well, I think instead of questions, we should just be giving you a round of applause first.
I'll bring teams up.
There we are. Yes. This is
Go
so
Kiwi!
freaking awesome.
Go Kiwi!
Go Kiwi! Thank you very much.